You know, most of us learn a pretty standard story about how the modern world came to be. But what if that story is missing some huge pieces? Today, we're going to look at some often overlooked perspectives on world history that might just make you see our present in a whole new light.
So let's just jump right in with a question. If you had to name the single most successful, most long-lasting political institution in all of human history, what would you guess? Democracy, maybe? The Roman Republic?
Well, it turns out the answer is actually divine kingship, the system used by the ancient Sumerians and Egyptians. It lasted for thousands of years. Now that is a stark contrast to the lifespan of many Western political systems, and right away it kind of challenges this idea that our way is the default, or, the final evolution of history. Okay, so to really get what we're challenging here, we first have to lay out that standard story, the version of history a lot of us probably got in school.
This story, it almost always starts in Europe. The big moment is the Peace of Westphalia back in 1648, which is where we get the whole idea of sovereign states. And the narrative is that this Westphalian system became the foundation for all modern politics, and it then spread out from Europe to, well, everywhere else.
The historian Niall Ferguson came up with this really famous theory to explain why the West rose to power. He called them the 6 killer apps. And his argument was that these specific ideas and institutions gave Europe this massive, decisive advantage. This is a huge part of that standard Eurocentric story, but it's a story that's being seriously re-examined.
All right, now let's rewind. Let's look at what the world was actually like before this rise of the West. Because it was far from some empty stage waiting for a hero. It was full of incredibly complex, sophisticated, and just wildly different ways of organizing the world. I mean, just look at the variety here. You had these tightly controlled empires like China, and then completely decentralized networks in India. And then you had the Indian Ocean, which was this wide-open trading world with no single power in charge at all. The big takeaway here is that there was never just one path to modernity. The world was a much more diverse place than the standard story lets on.
And here's a perfect example of a totally different way of thinking. Take the Chinese concept of Tian Sha, or all under heaven. Its goal is a harmonious global system. The whole world is the main political unit, not the individual state. That is a fundamentally different way of seeing things compared to the Westphalian model, which is all about competing states.
And listen, we're not just talking about abstract philosophies here. Look at the Americas. Civilizations like the Maya developed these incredibly precise calendars and mathematics, building these huge, complex cities completely separate from the old world. And get this, thousands of years before that, in what's now Pakistan and India, the Indus Valley Civilization had planned cities with stuff we'd recognize today, like public baths and even covered sewers. This was an unbelievably advanced urban society that came way before many of the classical civilizations we tend to focus on.
So we've got these vastly different worlds, all running on totally different operating systems. What happens when these worlds collide? Well, the difference is they go way deeper than just politics or tech. They go right to the core of what people believe about reality itself. Just look at this basic concept. Justice. The dominant Western view is all about punishment, right? You catch the bad guy, you make him pay. But in a lot of Aboriginal worldviews, the goal isn't punishment at all. It's restoration. It's about healing the harm that was done and putting the community back together.
And this isn't just theory. Look at this incredible true story of Charlie Fisher's Justice Circle. A boy breaks into a store. But look at how they handled it. Everyone sits in a circle as equals. There's no direct confrontation. They don't even discuss punishment. The entire goal was to cleanse the bad feelings on both sides until everyone was spiritually whole again. And then it was over. The harm was repaired, not just punished.
This kind of cultural divide can lead to some truly mind-bending moments. In this actual courtroom exchange, a lawyer is trying to get to the one, single, absolute truth of what happened. But the indigenous witness, Francis, explains that from his point of view, truth can be relative. For him, what actually happened is less important than restoring balance. It's a shocking moment because it shows two completely different realities just bouncing off each other.
And it all stems from these deep cultural values, like the ethic of non-interference. It's a worldview that values individual freedom so much that parents might not force their child to go to school because they believe the child has to make that choice freely. Now, that is a world away from the much more interventionist approach common in Western cultures, and you can see how these deep differences could easily lead to conflict.
So when you start to understand these deep, fundamental differences in how people see the world, it forces you to look at the colonial era in a whole new light. It's not a simple story of progress. It's a tragic collision of realities.
And before any major fighting or settlement came biology. Diseases from Europe, which indigenous peoples had zero immunity to, caused an absolutely catastrophic population collapse. Some estimates put the death toll as high as 95%. That number, that demographic catastrophe, is the essential backdrop for everything that came next.
Which leads some thinkers to go back to Ferguson's 6 killer apps. And they ask, was there a seventh? And was that seventh app colonialism itself? The argument is that the wealth and resources pulled from colonized lands weren't just a side effect of Western success. They were a primary engine of it. And that's a huge challenge to the idea that the West's rise was all down to its own internal virtues.
And you see this idea everywhere, even in online discussions like this one. This person is arguing that the biological collapse was the key factor, that without the devastation from disease, European colonization might have looked totally different, or maybe it wouldn't have been possible at all. At the same time, it's a really complex history, with a whole range of different viewpoints. One of the sources we examined includes this really provocative quote from a young man in Kinshasa. It shows a deep sense of frustration with the way things turned out after colonialism, leading some to question the benefits of independence in their specific case.
This collision of worlds, it didn't just end 100 years ago. Its legacies are all around us, and they are absolutely crucial for understanding where our increasingly complex world is headed.
I mean, just look at the incredible story of the Cherokee Nation. It is a powerful lesson in resilience. You can see on the timeline, they deliberately adopted Western political tools, a constitution, a Supreme Court, a legislature, as a way to fight for their own sovereignty. And even after the absolute horror of the Trail of Tears, they rebuilt their republic. It's this amazing story of a modern indigenous democracy.
And that brings us right to today, to a world that experts are starting to call polycentric.
Basically, it means the era of a single dominant superpower is ending. We're heading back to a world with multiple centers of power. China, India, the US, Europe, all with their own unique histories and ideas. In a strange way, it's starting to look a little bit like that diverse pre-colonial world we saw earlier.
And so this brings us to the final big question. As we try to navigate this new multipolar reality, we have to decide what to do with this more complete and honestly more complicated understanding of our past. Which ideas about justice, about order, and about truth are we going to carry forward? And really, that's a question for all of us to think about.